"My hands are too small," she said. The human let the alien child hold his thumb. The forest glowed in soft colors that Elia's Dre had never seen before. Every leaf shimmered slightly as if it were made of light, and the ground beneath him pulsed faintly with a rhythm he could almost feel in his chest. The air was thick with a scent that reminded him of fresh rain and something faintly sweet, like flowers he had never known. He adjusted the straps of his pack and stepped carefully over a thick root that stretched like a serpent across the path. He had been sent to survey this region, mapping out areas suitable for exploration and research, but he never expected to find the kind of world that seemed almost alive. Elias paused for a moment and listened. The forest was mostly quiet, except for the occasional whisper of wind through the glowing trees. But then he heard it, a soft, uneven cry. It was so faint that he almost missed it, thinking it was part of the forest's natural sound. But the crying came again, higher pitched this time, almost like the sound of a small creature calling out for help. His curiosity pulled him forward. He moved carefully through the thick undergrowth, parting glowing ferns and moss that sparkled under his touch. The cries became clearer as he walked, and soon he reached a small clearing where the light from the alien sky poured down in a warm golden hue. And there she was. The child was unlike anything he had ever seen. She was small, barely half the height of a human child his own age would have been. Her skin was translucent in parts, and it glimmered softly with faint streaks of light. Her eyes were large, luminous, and round, reflecting the golden light of the clearing. She was sitting on the ground, hugging her knees and staring at the glowing plants around her with wide, fearful eyes. When she noticed Elias, she gasped and pulled back slightly, her tiny hands trembling. "Emmer," she whispered in a language that Elias did not understand. Her voice was soft, almost musical, like the gentle chime of bells. Elias knelt slowly, careful not to scare her. "Hey there," he said softly, keeping his hands open and visible. "It's okay, I won't hurt you." The child's lips moved again, and this time he caught a phrase repeated slowly. "Hands too small." He tilted his head, trying to understand. She looked down at her hands and then back at him, her expression a mixture of fear and helplessness. He realized she was trying to tell him something important. Her hands were too small to reach something or maybe to hold something. Elias extended his right hand gently toward her. "Here," he said, "try holding my thumb." She hesitated, glancing at the forest as if checking for danger. Then slowly she stretched out her small hand. Her fingers barely wrapped around his thumb, but the grip was firm enough. Elias smiled, feeling the connection immediately. The child's trembling lessened and she stared at his hand, a mix of curiosity and relief on her face. "You're safe now," Elias whispered. "I'll help you." She let out a soft sound, half a sigh and half a laugh, that seemed to echo in the clearing. Elias could see that she was beginning to trust him. He lifted her gently, supporting her small frame against his chest. Her weight was surprisingly light, almost like holding a feather, and he felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. The child looked around, her glowing eyes taking in the forest. Elias realized she must have been alone for some time. Her clothes were simple, almost like a tunic made from woven plant fibers, and they were torn and dirty. Something had clearly happened to her before he found her. "Don't worry," Elias said again. "We'll figure it out." She looked up at him and repeated softly, "Hands too small." "Yes," he said, smiling gently. "That's why we hold hands. Together we can do anything." For a moment she just stared at him. Then slowly she wrapped her tiny fingers fully around his thumb, this time with confidence. Elias felt warmth spread through his chest. It was a small gesture, but it meant more than words ever could. Trust had been formed in the middle of a strange, glowing forest, between a human and a child of an alien species. Elias decided he needed to bring her back to the outpost. The forest was beautiful, yes, but it was also dangerous. There were creatures here that moved silently and swiftly, and he didn't know what the child could face if left alone. He adjusted his pack and stood, holding her close. As they walked, the child clung to his thumb. Occasionally she would look around at the plants, pointing at flowers or glowing vines. Elias smiled, trying to name them, even though he had no words for most. "That one's like a lantern," he said, touching a glowing bloom. She looked at it and giggled softly, a sound that was pure joy in the quiet forest. They moved cautiously, Elias leading the way and keeping his senses alert. Strange sounds occasionally echoed through the trees, rustles and clicks, but nothing seemed to approach them too closely. The child stayed close, her hands gripping his thumb tightly. He realized that even the smallest gestures could mean a lot in a moment like this. After a while, they reached a stream, its water glowing faintly under the alien light. The child leaned over and touched it with her tiny fingers. The water rippled and shimmered, and she let out a small laugh. Elias knelt beside her and splashed some water onto his own face. She mirrored him, splashing gently and watching the ripples dance. He laughed too, and for a moment the fear and loneliness in the child's eyes faded completely. As they rested by the stream, Elias tried to understand her. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked gently. She looked at him and tilted her head, unsure. Finally, she whispered something that sounded like Lyra. He nodded, committing it to memory. "Lyra," he said, "that's a beautiful name." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that lit up her small face. Elias thought about what had brought her here. The forest seemed wild and untouched by humans, but that didn't mean it was safe for a small child alone. He had to find out if there were other survivors, or if she truly was alone. For now, he decided, his priority was keeping her safe and comfortable. The sun, or what passed for a sun on this planet, began to set, casting long shadows that danced among the glowing trees. Elias knew they needed shelter. He looked around and spotted a hollowed-out area under a giant tree where the roots twisted to form a natural space. He carried Lyra carefully and set her down. "This will do for tonight," he said. She looked around the small space, her glowing eyes wide. Elias gathered some fallen branches and shaped a small barrier around them. He showed her how to curl up safely in the space he had made. She hesitated, then mimicked him, curling up and resting her head on her knees. Elias sat beside her, keeping a watchful eye on the forest. They stayed like that for a long time, the quiet of the forest broken only by distant sounds of unknown creatures. Lyra eventually relaxed, holding his thumb even as her eyes drooped with sleep. Elias watched her carefully, feeling a deep sense of responsibility and care. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now she was safe. Before sleep took over, Lyra whispered again, "Hands too small." Elias smiled softly, squeezing her hand gently. "Not too small," he said. "Together we can do anything." And for the first time since he arrived on this strange, glowing world, Elias felt a sense of purpose that went beyond exploration or research. It was the purpose of protecting and nurturing life, of showing kindness to someone who needed it most. And in that moment, he knew that this small, fragile being had already begun to change him, just as he would guide her to survive and thrive in this new world. As night fell, the forest glimmered like a sea of stars, and the human and the alien child slept under the roots of a giant tree. Their hands were clasped together, thumb in tiny palm, forming a simple bond that promised safety, trust, and the start of an extraordinary friendship. Tomorrow they would face challenges together. But tonight they were just two beings, alone in the universe, finding comfort in each other. The sun rose slowly over the glowing forest, casting long beams of light that turned the leaves into 1,000 sparkling colors. Elias' Dre stretched and shook off the sleep that had settled in his muscles overnight. Lyra was still asleep beside him, her small hand wrapped around his thumb. He watched her for a moment, feeling a mixture of wonder and responsibility. Her gentle breathing and the faint glow of her skin in the morning light reminded him that life, no matter how small or fragile, was a miracle worth protecting. He carefully shifted so as not to wake her and gathered a few things from his pack. Food, water, and a small kit for first aid. Lyra stirred slightly, murmuring something in her soft alien voice. Elias smiled. "Good morning, Lyra," he said. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking at the strange golden light of the morning. "Morn," she whispered, her small voice still hoarse from sleep. She held his thumb tightly as if grounding herself to reality through his presence. Elias nodded encouragingly. "Ready to start the day?" he asked. Lyra tilted her head and nodded, although she seemed unsure. Today would be the first real test of trust and cooperation between them. Elias knew that the forest, beautiful as it was, could also be dangerous. He had seen evidence of strange wildlife, and the terrain itself was unpredictable. As they began walking, Lyra stayed close, her small hand gripping his thumb like a lifeline. Elias pointed out various plants and creatures along the way. "This one's like a lamp," he said, touching a flower that glowed brightly in the morning sun. Lyra reached out with her tiny hand, stroking the petals gently. The glow flickered as if responding to her touch. She giggled softly, and Elias laughed along with her. They walked for hours, moving carefully but steadily through the forest. Elias noticed that Lyra was curious about everything. She pointed at glowing vines and strange, floating seeds, always asking questions in her musical, alien language. Elias didn't understand most of the words, but he began to recognize patterns, learning what she wanted to know. He answered with gestures, simple words, and demonstrations, and gradually she began to understand some of his language as well. By midday, they reached a small clearing with a shallow stream. Elias knelt and took a sip of water, showing her how to drink safely. Lyra mimicked him, cupping the water in her small hands. Some of it spilled, but she laughed at herself, and Elias laughed too. "That's okay," he said. "You'll get it soon." After they rested for a while, Elias noticed something unusual. Lyra's eyes were drawn to the sky. She pointed upwards and whispered rapidly. Elias tilted his head, trying to understand. Slowly, he realized she was pointing at a formation of glowing birds, or perhaps creatures that resembled birds. They moved in perfect synchrony, their bodies shimmering like liquid light as they soared overhead. "They're amazing," Elias said softly. Lyra's face lit up, and she stretched out her small hands toward the sky as if wishing she could touch them. Elias smiled. "Maybe one day you'll fly among them," he said. She laughed, a sound that echoed through the clearing, pure and joyous. As the day wore on, Elias realized that Lyra was more than just small and fragile. She was intelligent, curious, and brave. She wanted to explore, to understand, and to learn. Her small hands might not be able to reach or carry as much as his, but her mind was quick, and her instincts sharp. He felt a deep sense of admiration for her resilience. They continued walking, following a faint trail that Elias hoped would lead them closer to the research outpost. Along the way, they encountered more of the forest's wonders. Strange plants that shimmered with inner light, small creatures that moved in ways he had never seen, and delicate vines that seemed almost alive. Lyra would often pause to touch or examine them, sometimes giggling or making small sounds of delight. Elias encouraged her curiosity, realizing that her connection to the forest was instinctive and important. Around late afternoon, they came across a small hill with a vantage point overlooking a valley below. The valley was filled with dense vegetation, glowing softly under the alien light. Elias set Lyra down gently, and she explored the area, her small hands brushing over the plants, feeling their texture, sensing their subtle vibrations. Suddenly, Lyra froze. Her ears, or whatever functioned as ears, twitched slightly, and she made a low, warning sound. Elias followed her gaze and noticed movement in the valley below. A group of creatures, larger than any they had seen before, were moving stealthily. Their forms were shadowy, but their eyes glowed faintly. They appeared curious, perhaps cautious, but their size and speed made Elias wary. He crouched beside Lyra, whispering, "We need to be careful. Stay close to me." She immediately gripped his thumb tightly, her small hand a reassurance and a reminder of why he had taken responsibility for her. They watched silently as the creatures moved past, then began planning their descent into the valley. Elias realized this was a teaching moment. "See, Lyra," he said quietly. "Sometimes we need to watch and understand before we act. You're learning quickly. That's important." She nodded, mimicking his cautious movements, her small body tense but ready to follow his guidance. They continued down the slope slowly, Elias leading and Lyra following. At one point she stumbled, her tiny foot catching on a root. Instantly, Elias reached out, steadying her. She looked up at him with wide eyes, then held his thumb tightly. "Hands too small," she whispered, smiling faintly. Elias laughed softly. "Not too small. Perfect," he said. The valley floor was uneven and covered with thick undergrowth. Elias carefully stepped over roots and rocks, showing Lyra how to navigate safely. She watched him closely, mimicking each movement with surprising skill for someone so small. He felt proud of her adaptability, and she seemed to enjoy learning from him. As they walked, Elias noticed strange markings on the ground. Deep grooves, almost like tracks leading deeper into the valley. He knelt and examined them. "These might be from large animals," he said. Lyra crouched beside him, her glowing eyes wide with curiosity. She reached out and traced one of the grooves with her tiny fingers, feeling the shape and depth. Elias smiled. "You're learning fast," he said. Hours passed, and the sun began to set again, casting long, golden shadows across the valley. Elias knew they needed shelter soon. He spotted a small cave hidden behind a thick curtain of vines. "This will do for tonight," he said, lifting Lyra gently. She clung to his thumb as he carried her inside. The cave was safe and dry, with a soft layer of moss on the floor. He set her down and gathered some fallen branches to create a small barrier, just like the night before. Lyra watched him intently, then began mimicking his actions, arranging some moss herself. Elias smiled. "You're becoming very capable," he said. She looked at him, her small hands glowing faintly as she worked, and he realized that this child, despite her size, had an incredible spirit. They settled in for the night, the soft glow of the cave creating a warm, comforting atmosphere. Lyra held his thumb again, her tiny fingers wrapped around it securely. "Hands too small," she whispered. Elias shook his head gently, smiling. "Not too small, just right," he said. As they rested, Elias reflected on the day. Lyra had taught him as much as he had taught her. Her curiosity, her bravery, and her trust in him were lessons in patience and understanding. He realized that this bond, formed in the middle of a strange, glowing forest, was something extraordinary. He thought about the future. There would be challenges, more wildlife, rough terrain, and the mystery of what had happened to her family. But he also knew that together, they could face anything. Her small hands might not carry heavy things or reach high places, but her mind and her spirit were strong. And he would make sure she knew her value, her courage, and her worth. As night deepened, Lyra drifted into sleep, her small hand still holding his thumb. Elias stayed awake a little longer, keeping watch over the forest. The glowing plants seemed to pulse gently around them, as if acknowledging the bond between the human and the small alien child. For Elias, it was a moment of quiet reflection, a reminder of why humans could thrive in the galaxy, not just through technology or strength, but through kindness, patience, and understanding. Finally, Elias lay down beside her, his hand resting near hers. Sleep came slowly, but it was peaceful, filled with the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new adventures, new discoveries, and more lessons from a small being with a big heart. In the quiet glow of the alien forest, a human and a child of another species slept side by side, bound together by trust, curiosity, and the simplest gesture of all, a thumb held gently in a small, trembling hand. The bond they shared would guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead, and Elias knew that he had found something rare and precious in Lyra, a connection that transcended language, species, and even size. The next morning, the forest was alive with sound. Birds, or creatures that resembled birds, chirped and whistled, creating a chorus of strange and beautiful music. Elia's dray stretched and scanned the horizon, noting the glowing plants and the uneven terrain they would need to cross. Lyra was already awake, sitting cross-legged and watching him with her luminous eyes. Her small hands were clasped together and she seemed eager to begin the day. "Ready?" Elias asked gently. She nodded quickly, her small fingers reaching for his thumb. He offered it and she grasped it tightly, as she had done every morning since they met. It was a small gesture, but it carried trust, safety, and the beginning of a deep bond. They moved out carefully, following a narrow path through the glowing undergrowth. Elias led the way, stepping over roots, rocks, and glowing vines that pulsed softly under his touch. Lyra mirrored his movements, her small body nimble and cautious. It was clear that she was learning from him, absorbing every lesson about the forest and its dangers. As they descended a gentle slope, Elias noticed subtle changes in the forest. The air felt heavier, and the sounds of wildlife had decreased. He paused and knelt to examine the ground. Strange tracks marked the soft soil, larger than any creature they had seen before, with deep grooves that suggested claws or heavy feet. Elias' instincts went on high alert. "Lyra," he whispered, kneeling beside her. She looked up at him, her small hand still holding his thumb. "We need to be very careful, something is nearby." Her eyes widened and she tightened her grip on his thumb. Elias felt the pressure of her tiny hand and smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry, we'll be fine. Just follow me and stay close." They continued slowly, Elias scanning the trees and undergrowth for movement. The forest, beautiful and glowing as it was, could hide dangers, and he had a feeling that today they would face one of the forest's more challenging tests. Suddenly, a rustle came from the bushes ahead. Elias froze, signaling for Lyra to stop. The rustling grew louder, and a shadow emerged, a creature, larger than anything he had seen in the forest so far. Its body was long and sleek, covered in dark, reflective scales that caught the alien sunlight. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its movements were cautious but deliberate. Lyra gasped and hid slightly behind Elias, her small hands clutching his thumb. Elias knelt, trying to make himself appear non-threatening. "It's okay," he whispered. "Just stay calm." The creature stopped a few meters away, observing them. It tilted its head, curious rather than aggressive. Elias took slow steps to the side, guiding Lyra along with him. She followed, mimicking his cautious movements, her trust in him unwavering. "Look at her," Elias thought, glancing down at Lyra. Despite her small size and apparent vulnerability, she was learning, adapting, and facing this creature with him. Humans had the ability to teach, protect, and inspire. And in moments like this, that ability shone brighter than any technology or weapon. The creature sniffed the air, then moved on, disappearing into the forest. Elias let out a quiet breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Lyra looked up at him, her small face filled with awe and relief. "Safe?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Elias said, squeezing her hand gently. "Safe." They continued their journey, the tension slowly easing but still present. The forest floor became more uneven, with rocks and roots threatening to trip them. Elias showed Lyra how to place her feet carefully, step by step, and how to use her small hands to stabilize herself on the glowing vines and rocks. She followed his guidance meticulously, showing an incredible willingness to learn. By midday, they reached a small clearing where the forest opened up, revealing a narrow river winding through the valley below. The water glimmered with a soft, almost magical light. Lyra's eyes widened at the sight, and she ran a few steps ahead to the edge, her small hands tracing the surface of the water. Elias followed slowly, keeping a watchful eye on her. "Be careful," he said. "The current looks calm, but it can be tricky." Lyra nodded, listening carefully. Elias knelt and held out his thumb. She took it, and together they stepped carefully along the river bank. Elias guided her across slippery rocks and shallow areas, making sure she stayed balanced and safe. Each time she stumbled, he caught her gently, reminding her that mistakes were okay as long as she stayed with him. After crossing the river, they moved deeper into the valley. Elias noticed more tracks, deeper and more numerous than before. He paused again, examining them closely. "These creatures might live here," he said quietly. "We need to stay alert." Lyra looked at him with wide eyes, her small hands gripping his thumb tightly. Elias felt the weight of responsibility again. It was one thing to navigate the forest for himself. It was another to ensure the safety of a child from another species. He realized that humans had a unique ability to care, teach, and protect, a power that went beyond strength or size. As they moved forward, the forest became darker. The tall trees blocked much of the sunlight and the glowing plants were less frequent. Elias held Lyra close, guiding her through the dim light. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled slightly. Elias froze. Lyra's eyes widened in alarm. "Stay close," he whispered. From the shadows, a massive creature emerged. It was larger than the others they had seen, with thick legs and a long, flexible tail. Its eyes glowed faintly and it sniffed the air, clearly aware of their presence. Elias instinctively moved in front of Lyra, shielding her with his body. The creature took a step forward and Elias noticed its curious behavior. It wasn't attacking. They were intruders, but not enemies. He realized he needed to guide Lyra carefully. "We need to move slowly," he whispered, "step by step." He extended his hand again, offering his thumb. Lyra grabbed it tightly, and together they began to move slowly backward, keeping the creature in sight. Elias used calm movements, showing the creature that they meant no harm. Lyra followed his lead, her small hands mirroring his careful motions. After what felt like an eternity, the creature stopped, then slowly turned and disappeared into the shadows. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Lyra looked up at him, her small face glowing with relief. "Safe," she whispered again. "Yes," Elias said softly, squeezing her hand. "Safe." They continued their journey, but Elias knew they had to find shelter soon. The forest was beautiful, but it was also unpredictable and full of unknown dangers. He spotted a large hollowed tree further ahead, its roots forming a natural barrier and a safe place to rest. He carried Lyra carefully, making sure she felt secure. Inside the hollow, Elias arranged soft moss and leaves to create a comfortable resting space. Lyra mimicked him, arranging a small area for herself beside him. They settled in, the glow of the tree's interior creating a warm, safe atmosphere. Lyra held his thumb again, her small fingers wrapped around it securely. "Hands too small," she whispered once more. Elias shook his head gently, smiling. "Not too small, perfect," he said. As night fell, the forest outside the hollow became quiet and still. The glowing plants provided enough light to see, but it was soft and calming. Lyra drifted to sleep quickly, her trust in Elias evident in the way she relaxed beside him. Elias stayed awake for a while longer, thinking about the day. They had faced danger and uncertainty, yet together they had navigated it safely. He realized that humans had something special, the ability to teach, protect, and guide others. And in this forest with this small alien child, that ability shone brighter than ever. He reflected on Lyra's resilience and curiosity. Despite her small size and the challenges she faced, she had adapted, learned, and grown. Her trust in him was a testament to the power of human compassion and patience. He knew that tomorrow would bring new adventures, but he felt confident that together they could face anything. Finally, Elias allowed himself to rest, keeping one hand near Lyra, ready to react if needed. The bond between them, formed through trust and shared experiences, was stronger than ever. In the quiet glow of the forest, a human and a small alien child slept side by side, ready to face the unknown together, their hands, small and large, connected, symbolizing safety, trust, and the extraordinary potential of their partnership. The next morning, the forest felt calmer. The golden light of the alien sun filtered gently through the tall, glowing trees, painting everything with soft colors. Elia's dray stretched and scanned the area around the hollow tree where he and Lyra had slept. She was already awake, her small hands clasped together as she watched him with her glowing eyes. Her tiny form seemed more confident now, as if the previous day's dangers had taught her something important. "Good morning, Lyra," Elias said, smiling gently. She blinked and murmured a word that sounded like mourn. She reached for his thumb, holding it tightly. Elias nodded approvingly. Their connection was now routine, a silent agreement of trust that reassured both of them. Today, Elias decided, would be a day for learning and understanding. The forest was filled with life and mystery, and he wanted Lyra to explore safely while also discovering how her abilities could complement his own. He helped her down from the hollow, and together they started moving along a narrow path lined with luminescent plants. As they walked, Elias showed her how to observe the environment carefully. "Look at the leaves," he said, pointing to a cluster of glowing plants. "Notice the patterns. They tell you if it rained last night or if the soil is safe to walk on." Lyra crouched and examined the plants with her tiny hands, touching and tracing the veins. Her eyes glimmered with curiosity, and she made soft noises, as if commenting on her discoveries. "Good job," Elias said. "You're noticing details I might miss if I'm not careful." Lyra smiled faintly, a small, radiant smile that lit up her entire face. Her confidence was growing with each small success, and Elias felt proud of her. Humans had the ability to teach, but they also learned in return, and Lyra was teaching him patience and perspective through her curiosity and adaptability. As they continued, Elias noticed Lyra using her small hands to manipulate objects in ways he wouldn't have expected. She picked up a glowing seed and, with delicate movements, rolled it gently between her fingers. It opened slightly, revealing a tiny creature inside that looked like a miniature firefly. Elias watched, amazed. "Incredible," he whispered. "You have a natural touch with the life here. That's something humans can't always teach, you just have it." Lyra looked at him, her eyes shining. She held out the tiny creature for him to see. Elias leaned closer, careful not to disturb it, and nodded. "Yes, it's amazing. You're learning the forest and the forest is learning you. That's special." The forest began to change as they moved deeper. The air grew cooler and the glowing plants became less frequent. In their place were tall, thin trees with smooth bark that reflected light like mirrors. The undergrowth was denser and the path narrower. Elias paused, scanning for signs of wildlife. Lyra crouched beside him, her small hands gripping his thumb tightly. Suddenly, a series of soft clicks echoed through the trees. Elias froze, motioning for Lyra to stay still. The sounds grew louder, rhythmic, and deliberate. From the shadows, small creatures emerged, moving in perfect synchronization. They were unlike anything Elias had ever seen, with translucent bodies and glowing veins that pulsed softly. They circled the humans, curious but cautious, their movements precise and intelligent. Lyra's eyes widened in amazement. She whispered softly, pointing at the creatures. Elias nodded. "They're curious but not dangerous," he said. "Watch and learn. Understanding them is better than rushing in." Lyra crouched, observing carefully. She mirrored Elias' careful, deliberate movements, showing how quickly she was learning from him. The creatures circled closer, then paused, almost as if waiting for permission to approach. Elias extended his thumb. Lyra took it, and together they moved slowly forward. One of the creatures stepped closer, its tiny glowing legs brushing against the soft moss. Lyra gasped quietly, but she held Elia's thumb tightly. He smiled reassuringly. See, patience and calmness work better than fear. The creatures stayed for a few minutes, examining Lyra and Elias, then retreated into the shadows. Lyra laughed softly, a sound filled with wonder and relief. Elias nodded. You're doing great, he said. The forest trusts you more every day, and you're learning to trust it too. They continued, moving toward a section of the forest where the ground sloped gently upward. Elias pointed out landmarks and safe paths, teaching Lyra to recognize signs in the environment. She watched carefully, learning quickly. Her small hands traced the shapes of plants, rocks, and vines, absorbing the textures and patterns. Elias realized that her small hands, though delicate, were incredibly precise, able to sense and manipulate things he would struggle with himself. Around midday, they reached a shallow stream. The water shimmered with a soft, inner light, reflecting the sky above. Lyra ran forward, her small hands cupping the water. Elias knelt beside her, showing her how to drink safely. She followed his example perfectly, taking care not to spill a drop. He smiled. Good job, Lyra. You're learning fast. After drinking, they moved along the stream, observing the plants and creatures that lived near the water. Elias taught Lyra to recognize which plants were edible, which could be used for shelter, and which were dangerous. She absorbed the lessons eagerly, asking questions in her melodic language and learning his words in return. It was clear that this small child had an extraordinary ability to learn and adapt. As they walked, Elias noticed that Lyra was beginning to imitate him in subtle ways. She moved carefully over roots and rocks, mimicked his hand signals, and even started anticipating his instructions. He realized that she was not only learning survival skills, but also understanding the logic and reasoning behind his actions. Humans had the ability to think ahead, to anticipate danger, and to teach others how to do the same. And Lyra was absorbing it all with remarkable speed. By late afternoon, they reached a small cliff overlooking a valley. The view was breathtaking. Glowing rivers wound through the forest below, and tall, shimmering trees stretched as far as the eye could see. Lyra ran to the edge, her small hands brushing over the plants at the cliff's edge. She looked at Elias, her eyes wide with excitement. Beautiful, Elias said softly. Look at all this. The world is full of wonders, and we're lucky to see them together. Lyra nodded, her small hand still holding his thumb. Elias realized that humans had the ability to teach appreciation, to share wonder and awe with others. And through Lyra's eyes, he was seeing the forest anew, noticing details and beauty he might have overlooked. As the sun began to set, Elias and Lyra found a safe place to rest for the night. A shallow cave hidden behind vines offered shelter, and they settled in. Elias arranged moss and leaves to make a comfortable space, while Lyra mimicked him, creating a small area beside him. She held his thumb tightly, her small fingers glowing softly in the dim light. Hands too small, she whispered again. Elias shook his head gently. Not too small, perfect, he said. They sat quietly, observing the glow of the forest around them. Elias thought about how much Lyra had learned in just a few days. She had faced danger, adapted to a strange environment, and developed trust and confidence. Her small hands had proven more than capable when guided. Her curiosity had taught him patience, and her courage had reminded him of the importance of trust and understanding. Elias realized that humans had a unique role in the galaxy, not just as explorers or survivors, but as teachers, guides, and protectors. They could inspire, nurture, and form bonds that transcended species. And Lyra, with her small hands and glowing eyes, was a perfect example of how trust and guidance could create extraordinary potential. As night deepened, Lyra curled up beside Elias, her small hands still holding his thumb. He stayed awake for a while, keeping watch, reflecting on the lessons of the day. The forest was still, the glowing plants casting soft light around them, and he felt a deep sense of purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, and more opportunities to teach and learn. But for now, they rested together, safe and connected. The bond between them, formed through shared experiences, trust, and understanding, had grown stronger. In the quiet of the glowing forest, a human and a small alien child had found friendship, trust, and the beginning of something extraordinary, a connection that would guide them through the unknown, no matter what lay ahead. The next morning, the forest was calm and bright. The golden light of the alien sun filtered through the tall trees, casting soft, warm colors across the glowing undergrowth. Elia's dray stretched and looked around the hollow where he and Lyra had spent the night. She was awake, sitting on the soft moss with her small hands clasped together, watching him with her luminous eyes. She looked more confident now, her face radiant with curiosity and energy. "Good morning, Lyra," Elia said softly. She blinked and whispered something that sounded like mourn. She reached for his thumb, and he offered it willingly. She held it tightly, her small fingers curling around him as always. Elias smiled, feeling the familiar sense of connection and trust that had grown between them over the past days. Today, they would journey toward the human outpost. Elias wanted Lyra to see that she was not alone, that there were others who could help her and learn from her as well. But he also knew that the journey would test their skills and courage once more. The forest was unpredictable, full of wonders but also dangers. He wanted her to experience both safely. They started walking, Lyra holding his thumb as they navigated the glowing forest. Elias pointed out familiar landmarks from their earlier journey and taught her to notice small details. The way plants bent toward sunlight, the subtle ripple of water under moss-covered stones, and the sounds of wildlife signaling nearby creatures. Lyra watched closely, her small hands touching and exploring everything with wonder. After some time, they came across a wide river. Its water shimmered with a soft, inner glow, and the current moved gently but steadily. Lyra's eyes widened as she peered into the flowing water and she reached forward instinctively. Elias knelt beside her. "We need to cross carefully," he said. "Step by step, 1 foot at a time." She nodded, her small hand gripping his thumb tightly. Together they stepped onto the smooth, wet stones. Elias guided her carefully, watching her tiny movements and offering encouragement. Each time she hesitated, he squeezed her hand gently. "You can do it," he said. "I'm right here with you." Halfway across, one of the stones shifted under her foot. Lyra stumbled slightly, but Elias caught her instantly, steadying her small frame. She looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes. "Hands too small," she whispered softly. Elias smiled. "Not too small," he said. "Just right, perfect." She giggled softly and they continued, reaching the far side safely. As they walked along the riverbank, Elias explained more about the world they lived in. "Humans and your species can learn from each other," he said. "We can share knowledge, care for each other, and face challenges together. That's what makes us strong." Lyra listened intently, her glowing eyes reflecting understanding. She squeezed his thumb, as if agreeing silently. The terrain grew rougher as they approached the outpost. Tall cliffs and dense undergrowth blocked the path, but Elias guided Lyra skillfully. She copied his movements, using her small hands to balance herself and climb over obstacles. Elias felt proud. Her courage, intelligence, and adaptability had grown immensely since the first day they met. Finally, in the distance, they saw the human outpost. Metallic structures rose above the forest, glinting in the sunlight. Lyra's eyes widened and she whispered something that sounded like awe. Elias smiled. "We're almost there. You're going to meet others who will help you, and they will be amazed by what you can do." As they neared the outpost, a group of humans noticed them. Scientists and explorers had been scanning the forest and were delighted to see Elias returning with a small alien child. They rushed forward, ready to offer assistance. Lyra looked nervous at first, her small hands gripping Elia's thumb tightly. Elias knelt beside her. "It's okay," he said softly. "They're friendly, you're safe." One of the scientists stepped forward and extended a hand. Elias gently guided Lyra's small hand to meet theirs. She hesitated, then let go of his thumb to grasp the new hand. The scientist smiled warmly, marveling at her tiny fingers and glowing skin. "Hello, little one," they said. "You're very brave." Lyra smiled faintly, a mix of shyness and pride. Elias watched, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. She had grown so much in just a few days, trusting, curious, intelligent, and courageous. Humans had the ability to teach, guide, and inspire, and Lyra had learned quickly, showing that the bond between species could be strong and meaningful. The team led them inside the outpost, where Lyra explored cautiously, her small hands tracing walls and devices. Elias explained her abilities, her curiosity, and her trust in humans. The scientists and explorers listened attentively, asking questions and offering gentle encouragement. Lyra responded with gestures, soft words, and careful movements, showing her intelligence and adaptability. Throughout the day, Elias guided her interactions, teaching her to communicate with the humans and understand their language. She learned quickly, forming words and phrases that reflected her thoughts and feelings. Elias marveled at her progress, realizing that her small hands were capable of great things, especially when guided by understanding and patience. In the afternoon, the team decided to explore the surrounding forest with Lyra and Elias. The alien child led the way in some areas, using her instincts and knowledge to navigate safely. Elias observed proudly as she pointed out plants, animals, and hidden paths, showing that she had truly adapted to her environment. Humans learned from her as much as she learned from them. At one point, they encountered a steep cliff. Lyra's small hands could not reach the top alone, but Elias extended his thumb and she grasped it. Together, they climbed carefully, step by step. At the top, she looked out over the valley below, her glowing eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. She laughed softly, a sound of joy and triumph. "You did it," Elias said. "I'm proud of you." Lyra squeezed his thumb in response, her small fingers glowing with warmth. Elias realized that humans had the power to teach courage and resilience, and she had learned both. As the sun began to set, they returned to the outpost. Lyra's small hand still held Elias' thumb, a gesture that had become a symbol of their trust and connection. Scientists and explorers watched, inspired by the bond between the human and the alien child. Elias knew that this connection was more than just guidance. It was friendship, understanding, and the potential for future collaboration between species. That evening, as the outpost settled into quiet, Elias and Lyra sat together outside. The sky above glowed with alien stars and the forest shimmered softly in the distance. Lyra looked up at Elias, her small hand still holding his thumb. "Hands too small," she whispered softly. Elias shook his head gently, smiling. "Not too small, perfect," he said. She smiled faintly, leaning slightly against him. He reflected on their journey, the dangers they faced, the lessons learned, and the trust they had built. Humans had the ability to inspire, protect, and teach, and through his guidance, Lyra had grown confident, curious, and brave. She had learned the ways of the forest, the importance of patience, and the value of trust. In turn, she had taught him humility, wonder, and the joy of seeing the world through her eyes. As night deepened, Elias realized that this was only the beginning. Lyra had the potential to become a bridge between her species and humanity, a symbol of cooperation, understanding, and the extraordinary possibilities of connection. Humans had the ability to uplift and nurture life, and in Lyra, he had witnessed the power of that ability firsthand. They stayed outside for a while longer, observing the stars and the glowing forest. Lyra's small hand remained in his, and Elias felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew that tomorrow would bring new adventures and challenges, but he was confident that together they could face anything. Finally, they returned to their quarters inside the outpost. Lyra curled up on a soft mat, her small hand still gripping his thumb until the last moment. Elias watched her, feeling a mixture of pride, care, and hope. He knew that humans had the power to make a difference, to guide and protect, and that even the smallest hands could accomplish great things when given trust, patience, and understanding. As sleep overtook them, Elias reflected one last time on the journey. The forest, the creatures, the glowing plants, and most of all, Lyra herself had shown him the extraordinary potential of human compassion and courage. Trust, guidance, and friendship had created something remarkable, an interspecies bond that would shape the future. In the quiet of the alien forest and the glow of the outpost, a human and a small alien child slept peacefully, their hands connected, symbolizing safety, understanding, and hope. The journey had been long, the challenges many, but they had faced them together. And as the stars shone above, Elias knew that their story was only beginning, a testament to the incredible power of humans to inspire, protect, and bring out the best in others.